Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sabine. Today we have a replay of one of our most popular projects, and that's the double-handed oven mitt. I love these. This is what I have at my own kitchen because it can just sit over the oven handle and be ready whenever you need it. There's no searching through cupboards to try to locate it. And I like to have one that's seasonal and one that I have out all the time. So we have 3 new kits for you here today, and we're going to take a peek at those before we get into the tutorial. But this tutorial is so fun. We're using some Insul-Bright, which is a special batting that has a reflective coating applied to it so it reflects heat back to the source. So we're going to use that in combination with regular scrap batting that you probably have around. So that way you're able to pull dishes in and out of the oven safely. I've also used this as a hot pad when I need to, but I love this because it's a really great way to customize it and make it look great for your kitchen and your tastes. And also you could coordinate it with some placemats if you wanted and really have a lot of fun with it. And it's a really fast project. I think I got the initial one done in a couple of hours while filming, and it always takes longer when you're filming. And so it's a really great giftable project too. I know we just finished the holidays, but it's never too early to start thinking about next year, and it's just so fun. All right, so let's take a peek at this and then we'll get on with the tutorial. So first up, we did one in Rummel's latest collection. So if you have a beach house or a lake house, or you like having that look, I know a lot of us have the look even though we don't have the beach house. This is a really good one. It looks gorgeous on the outside. I mean, this is just a nice big one. It looks fantastic. We've got a nice dark binding going around the edges, which is good because it'll cover up any splatters. And then this pebble print is really fabulous as well. In fact, I love this so much that I have a bigger version of this in my bathroom to help it look really nice and tranquil. So it's really great. You can just put your hands in the pockets and pull things right out of the oven. It's the perfect size to pull a pan out and back in again. And then when you're done, just pop it over the oven handle and it's ready to go for you. Next up, we have Festive Fauna from Figo. This is about the last we have of this collection. There's not a whole lot left, but I thought this one would be particularly sweet because it looks really good for springtime and it's got cupcakes on it. So if you are a big cupcake baker fan like I am, this is perfect for you because it's got the nice soft colors for spring, some fun cupcakes on the outside, and then a little bit darker print on the inside. Again, so if you get any spills on it, it's not the end of the world. And last but not least, we have a Rifle Paper Company version. This one features a lot of the florals, and it is really gorgeous. And just because we've arranged it this way doesn't mean you have to. You can always flip-flop things. Like if you would rather have the lighter gray print showing on the outside, you certainly could if that's more your vibe, and then have the darker print be the side that's going to touch the potentially dirty dishes. That's perfectly fine as well. But I love this stripe. We use bias binding to go around the edges, and I show you how to make enough for this using a fat quarter. It really is a neat technique, and I show you how to do it in this video, and it really is fantastic the way it works. And I love it when the striped binding ends up being on that bias because it makes it look diagonal going around and makes it really fun. Now there is a metallic in both of these prints. It's actually the same print, just a different background. So it is a little bit more expensive just because of that, but it looks stunningly gorgeous. All right, let's get on with the tutorial, and you guys can learn how to do this yourself out of stash, or you can get some Insul-Bright and kits from us. If you get the kits from us, it includes all your fabric and your batting and your Insul-Bright, so it is ready to go, and it's a nice, affordable, fast, giftable project, or something you can just whip up to make your kitchen a little more cheery this spring. So to make this project, you of course are going to need your template, which you can get on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Just download the Double Oven Mitt pattern, and this, along with all the instructions, is in there. You're going to need a 1/2 yard of your outside fabric, a 1/2 yard of your lining fabric, a fat quarter for the binding, and just some batting scraps are just fine, and about a 1/2 yard of your Insul-Bright. This is the special material that will reflect heat, so it's good to use in pot holders or projects like this. You're gonna need a good pair of sharp scissors. We're gonna be cutting through a lot of layers, some pins, and binding clips are very helpful, but not super necessary. But if you've got them or you've been thinking about getting them, now's a good time. Some sort of marking tool and a bias tape maker. I've got these ones from Purple Hobbies. You can also use them to make jelly roll rugs, and they clamp onto your table. We have them in lots of colors and different sizes. The sizes indicate the width in here that will clamp onto your table. I will say it doesn't always clamp perfectly well, but yeah, that doesn't really matter for today's project. And then also we have going to use some spray mist. I'm just using water in this, but starch is helpful as well if you have a favorite starch or spray starch alternative that you use. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to layer our fabric up. There's a really specific way we need to do this so that the heat reflecting is going against the area where the hot pan is going to be. This is all written out in your instructions, as well as I'm going to show you right here and now. But for all the steps, both the pockets and then your main piece that's going to be on the outside, you're going to follow this layering order. All right, so first I'm taking my lining fabric and I'm going to flip that over so the wrong side is facing up. So if you think about the way it's going to be when it's all done, this is kind of how we're arranging it. Now the lining side is going to be the side that is going to be touching the hot part. So we want to make sure that we take our Insul-Bright and we're going to use the aluminum side, which is the shiny gray side, silver side, and we're going to lay that face down. So that shiny side is facing the wrong side of our lining fabric. Now I'm going to take my batting scrap and I'm going to layer that next. There is a right and wrong side to batting. It doesn't matter so much in this one, but I'm having the right side facing my main fabric, which is now going to go face up. So in the end of it, what matters the most is that you've got your main fabric and your lining fabric facing to the outsides, and when you flip it over, you've got your silver side facing the wrong side of your lining. So that way when we go to grab stuff in the oven like this, we have the heat reflecting back at the hot pan and not at us. So here's where the clips come in handy. We could pin all of this, but it's a whole lot easier to just clip my corners with these because you've got a lot of layers here. It's 2 layers of fabric plus 2 layers of thick batting and batting like material, and so this is just a really easy way to keep everything together. Now I also am going to pin about halfway through on this pocket side because we're going to use our template on this next, and so I just want to make sure that there's something to hold all my layers together when I take that template and cut off my corners. So I'm just laying this so that the bottom is even with the bottom of my pocket, and I'm going to clip that in place, and then I'm also going to adjust the clips on the side so that way I am clipped through all the layers and I can help hold that template in place without having to poke holes in it and with a bunch of pins. Now I'm going to take my friction gel pen. Any marking tool will work for this. You just wouldn't want to use like a real pen because that could bleed if you have to wash it, and let's face it, this is probably a project you're going to have to wash at some point because it's going to get maybe a little dirty as you cook. But I'm just outlining where the edge of that template is. All right, now I can remove that template and I am keeping all my clips right where they were. So we're good there. So now I'm just going to cut along the lines that I marked to remove the outsides and create that nice curve. Now I'm making sure that I'm using the sharpest pair of scissors we have here because we are going through several layers at once. I don't want them to shift on me. And I am kind of just curving in a little bit here. But the reason why I like to clip them all together is if I were to line these up all individually, one, that's going to take a lot of extra time, and two, I might be off just a smidge when I do that. And this way, I'm going to at least have all of these layers be at the same point. And so that's going to make your life a little bit easier when we go on to the next step. All right, so I can take the clips off of these and use them later. And what I'm going to do next, I can toss those corners, is I'm just going to stitch all the way around the outsides of this part with essentially a stay stitch. I'm going to use my walking foot for this. You want to use your walking foot anytime you're sewing more than 2 layers together. So quilting, sewing, binding, and in this case, making sure we're keeping all of our layers together for our pocket and our main piece. And that way, when we go to sew them together later and put binding strips on later, this will all be together and secured, and we don't have to worry about it shifting and then we're missing bits and getting frustrated. So it's worth the extra step here. What we're going to do is we're going to stitch probably like 1/8 of an inch stitch all the way around the edge. You want to be within the seam line so that when we add the binding later, it's going to be covered up and you won't see it. So I know that when I stitch with the needle in the center position, I'm essentially sewing about a 1/4 inch stitch away from the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my sewing machine needle over like to 6.0. And that would be where I would sew it if it were a scant 1/4 inch on a regular 1/4 inch foot. That way I can line this up and I can just stitch in those corners. You can also increase your stitch length a little bit here because this is really just a basing stitch. We just want to hold everything together so that way we're not fussing with it when we get to later steps. All right, so I have sewn all the way around and I flipped it over and I noticed that I missed a good chunk on the side here. I've got it all in the other areas real well, but I need to go through and I'm just going to sew through from the other side and just make sure I'm catching that. I was just a little bit too close to the edge and it didn't work out. So this is why we do it at this point, so that way everything is together and we don't just have to worry about it. All right, I've caught all my layers. I've got my first pocket all ready to go here. I can also go across the top if I want, but I actually think I'm gonna need to square that off a bit, so I'm gonna skip that for now. But if you wanted to quilt it, now is the time. I'm gonna leave mine unquilted because I really like the look of this print all on its own. And I'm just going to go around the rest of my pieces now. For the big long piece, I'm going to go ahead and start right in the center because I've got a nice straight of grain here to work with, and that way the layers will be less likely to shift on me as I go. The walking foot is what helps move all your layers together at the same pace, so that way you're less likely to have that happen, but it still is happening a little bit to me, so I'm just taking that extra precaution. All right, so I am about to get to the point where I started. I'm giving this a little bit of tension. I'm just giving a little bit of a tug here, and that will help. If anything shifted a little bit, make sure you don't end up with any pleats on the backside. All right, this is already looking super cute. We've got our big long piece. We're going to have our pockets, which will sit on the inside like this and just be super cute and adorable. But what we have to do next is prep our bias binding. And it has to be bias binding because it has to be able to work around these curves. So I'm gonna show you how to do that from a fat quarter. We're gonna be able to get about 5 yards of 2.5 inch bias binding. And that way we can just go straight around these edges and get it attached. All right, so we're gonna make continuous bias binding. We're gonna be able to get about 5 yards from one fat quarter. So I've already got one straight side here, it looks like, from when it was cut. This one came straight off the bolt, so it is nice and crooked over here, and this might be straight, we'll see. But I'm gonna use this as my straight edge. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip it around so that that straight edge is facing me. Then I'm gonna line any inch line of my ruler up with that straight edge, and I'm gonna square it up. So I'm gonna scoot it over as far as I can go, and I'm gonna take my rotary cutter, oops, see, I have ruler slips too. It's usually whenever I don't stand up to cut. I don't have the same control. That's better. All right, so now I've got a nice right angle here, and I just need to keep working my way around the fat quarter until I have right angles everywhere. All right, so I've made it around all 4 sides. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut a 45-degree angle out of here to create one large triangle, and then you're gonna have another triangle with a little bit extra on the side because this piece is not square. So your ruler has different lines on it, and we can see here that we've got a nice 45-degree line here. So I'm just gonna line my 45-degree line up with the bottom here, and then bring it right into the corner. So I've got my 45-degree line going along here, and then the edge of that ruler is even right with the corner. You can see I'm not gonna make it all the way across, but that's okay. I'll be able to make it a good chunk of the way. And now I can move this out of the way. Here's a fun tip. All you gotta do is flip that ruler around. You can add another 45-degree line here, and we can line that up at the top and then scooch it over until it's also in line with the edge here. And now we know that we're gonna have a nice straight line here to work with. All right, so now we have the triangle that we cut out, and then we have the triangle with a little bit extra on the side. And so what we're gonna do now is we're going to flip this right sides together. We're gonna take the straight edge here, and we're just gonna lay it right sides together over here. Now this should be the same length at this point because we squared everything up. But I'm going to go ahead and I normally don't pin anything if I can avoid it, but I'm going to go ahead and pin at the front and back so that way those stay exactly even with each other as I sew this together. Now, ideally you would sew this with just your plain 1/4 inch foot. I'm going to go ahead and sew with my walking foot because I don't feel like changing it out, and I know that I can do just this little bit and have it be okay. But if you're not so sure about it, either prep your binding ahead of time so you don't have to switch feet in the middle of the project, or just go ahead and sew it like I am with your walking foot. There are some quilters who like swear by sewing with your walking foot for piecing. I am not one of them, but I will do it on occasion when I'm feeling too lazy to switch out my foot. All right, now we're going to press this seam open. That'll help reduce bulk as we sew. And also, this is basically going to allow us, between this and the next step, will allow us to not have to sew all the tiny little strips together. We're just going to be able to cut that entire 5 yards worth all at once. Now, whenever I press open, I like to do it from both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this to the other side. I'm also going to give it a little spray just to help get that nice and flat. All right, so now we've got a parallelogram, and what we're going to do is we're going to start measuring out 2.5 inch widths, and we're going to do that along the whole side, and we're just going to keep marking it. You don't want to use something like your friction gel pen for this because we do need to press this eventually, and that will get rid of the lines, and we are going to need those. So you do want to use something that either isn't going to go away with heat, or just a pencil is perfect as well. So I'm just lining up 2.5 inches with the bottom here, making sure it's nice and straight across, and then I'm just going to mark that with my pencil. I like to angle my pencil in toward the ruler because then it's more likely to be right on. If I'm going this way, or definitely angling it this way, then I'm not going to be right at 2.5 inches, and I'm going to have strips that vary in width. All right, so it might be kind of hard to see on camera, but I've got my first line at 2.5 here. So now I'm going to use that as my measurement going forward. So I'm going to put 2.5 inches now right on there, and that is my new guide. So I'm going to keep doing this until I've worked my way across the entire piece. All right, so this last bit is not 2.5 inches. We're not gonna worry about that. Now this part is gonna seem weird when we get started. All right, so I've got my piece laid out here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and lay these in. It makes a little bit more sense when you see it visually this way. So we can see that we have our lines are coming together, and I'm gonna zoom in a little bit so you can see it even better. So I marked the start of my lines with permanent marker. I've only done that so you guys can see a little better on camera. Pencil's just fine for you at home. Now, if you are gonna line them up straight like this, you can see one with one, then what you're gonna have is you're going to have just strips that you come off. So what we wanna do is offset it by 1. So here's our first line and first line. We're going to move it so that our second line is lining up with our first line. That will allow us to cut it off so that we have a coil instead. All right, so now you can see here's our first line, it's offset, and here is our first line with our second line here. So that way when we sew it together, we're going to be able to start cutting with our scissors here, and it will be one continuous loop, and we won't have to do any more seams, which is fabulous. All right, so I'm just going to pick up these two, and I'm just going to get them so they're going in the same direction. All right, so we want these to overlap just a smidge. So I'm going to eyeball about 1/4 inch in, and I'm just gonna poke through that first side right here. And I almost hit it on the back here. You can see I'm just a little to the side of that. So I'm just gonna move it over just a smidge. so that it can go through there, and then we're good to go. We can just go ahead and pin right there. So I'm going to keep doing that, working my way down. We'll show it one more time. Again, I'm going in about 1/4 inch away from the edge of that fabric, and then I'm trying to hit about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the other one, still on that line that I drew. And that'll make sure that these lines are pretty close to each other. It's binding, it's not the end of the world if it's not perfect, but we wanna be as accurate as we can. All right, now this last one isn't gonna match up with anything. This is going to be the end because this is not a full 2.5 inches. Totally fine, we're gonna have plenty. All right, so this is looking a little strange at the moment. We're just gonna flip it down and we're just gonna sew down the side that we pinned, and we're gonna be able to cut and just have a continuous strip. I'm still just gonna use my walking foot for this step. If you wanted to use your regular one, go right ahead and do that. You also could have just prepped this before you put your walking foot on, which is probably what I should have done, but I wanted to do all the steps in order for the video. All right, now when you lay this out, you should see that the lines are going straight across from one edge to the other. They are on mine, so that's great. So I'm just gonna start cutting on the edge here and just start making my way around. Actually, I think I'm gonna cut over here. This is the first full one. The other one is our waist at the end because it's not quite long enough. All right, I find it kind of cumbersome to press this first. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna go ahead and just start cutting. And so I'm just gonna follow those lines and start working my way around, and we're gonna have one big long strip come off. All right, we're coming to our first seam. I can see that it's going straight across here, which is great. That's exactly what we want. I'm just gonna cut right across. And here you can really kind of see now. It's just gonna come off in one big spiral and it's gonna be fabulous. All right, so I've got my very end here. This is where it gets to be too tiny. So I'm just gonna go ahead and snip that off. All right, so we just have this teeny little bit of waste. We got enough binding to go around everything we need. I'm gonna go ahead and toss that. I'm gonna press open my seams. Now we're gonna turn this into a double fold bias binding strip. I've got just water in here, but you can use spray starch too. It'll just help it hold its shape once it goes through. It's easiest to get it through when you have an angle, like we do here. So we're just going to go ahead and give that point a tug. Then we need to center it. And you can see that it turns it in at the same time that it turns it over, which is fabulous and is going to save you some headache. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it set up. The first part always takes a tad bit of setup. But once you have it going, it just likes to kind of feed through. So I'm going to go a little further and then just turn it to the side and press the next bit. All right, I'm going to keep doing this all the way down to create my bias binding strip. All right, I've got my cute little roll of bias binding ready to go. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna square up these because sometimes they shift a little when you're going around. So I just wanna make sure I have a nice straight side. All right, there's two ways you can do this. The first way is you can just unfold your binding like this. You can stick this in the center so that way it is even with that fold there. And then you can fold it over the top and do a nice little cute decorative stitch over the top, and it'll cover both your binding and the back, the front and the back evenly. But I don't know about you, I'm not a machine, and so this bias binding isn't super straight throughout the entire roll. So I'm gonna do something that's a little bit more invisible as far as seam options go. So I'm just going to cut myself a little width that is a little bit longer than my pot holder. You can see here, I'm like a little bit in here. So I just want it to be, you know, nice and tidy. So I'm going to unfold my strip and I'm going to line up the edge of the raw edge, even with the edge of the top of my pot holder here. Just gonna give that a little clip, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna stitch right down the center of where that fold is. Then I'm gonna be able to fold this over and I can hand stitch it to the other side, which I'm gonna like the results of a lot better. All right, so I'm just stitching right down that fold. And that is just my guide. I'm not really worrying about seam allowances, just going straight down the fold from the iron. All right, we've got a little bit more stay stitching to do, and then we're ready to put the binding around the entire bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and just line up my pocket even with the outside. So that way we're gonna see the outside of our gingerbread men and the outside of this all together. And I'm just gonna grab my clips and just go around just to hold it together. We're gonna do the same thing we did at the beginning where we just went around the edges. We're gonna also go over that pocket binding as well. I'm gonna go ahead and get my bottoms and sides first, and then just throw a couple over here. And do the same thing for the other side as well. I'm going to go ahead and move that over as far as I can. So that way, again, we're doing that stitch within the seam allowance. We do not want to be able to see this from the front side. I am also, since this is going to have a little bit more stress, I'm going to back stitch a little bit over where that pocket is. Now remember, you want to flip this over and check that you got all the sides. In this case, I did. You can throw your hand in and also make sure that you don't have any hand holes coming out. But it's starting to look real good at this point. I'm very excited. I'm going to do up the other side as well. Then we're ready to do binding. All right, now we're gonna put binding around. We're gonna go all the way around. Whatever method you did for the first one, you wanna do the same for the second. So if you are just tucking it on the inside and doing a decorative stitch and calling it a day, go for it. I'm gonna continue my method of stitching, lining up the edges, stitching right in that fold and going around. I'm going to sew continuous binding. I don't feel like I need a loop on this because I just hang mine over my handle of my oven. But if you wanted to do a loop, you could do that as well. What you would do is you would just start it off like this, and you would want to leave a little bit open. And then when you came around to the other side, stitch all the way out to get the loop, and then tuck the end of the loop underneath, and then go ahead and stitch the rest of the way down. And it'll cover it real nice. But I'm going to do continuous binding on mine, and we're gonna get started sewing this around, and then we'll be all finished and ready to bake some cookies. All right, so just like continuous binding with a quilt, I'm actually gonna line my binding up about halfway through, but I'm gonna start about 6 inches down, so I got plenty of room to join those edges in the end. I'm gonna stitch forward and back a little bit here, so I don't rip that up when I'm getting the continuous binding together later. And then I'm just going to keep stitching down that fold line, making sure that I'm keeping the edge lined up with the edge of the pot holder. Now this will fold nice when you go around the edges, but you kind of have to go in little bits. So you can't just swoop around it. I'm just going to line up my edges a little bit. You could pin this if you wanted or clip it, but I'm just doing a teeny little bit at a time, making sure to line up those raw edges so that everything looks really nice, and then just work my way around. All right, this next part is the exact same as when you're joining binding for continuous binding on a quilt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my binding until it is about halfway in between, and I'm just going to give it a trim, nice perpendicular across that. All right, now what I want to do is I want to line this up so that I'm going to be going 2.5 inches past across that. So I'm lining up 2.5 inches even with the edge there. Actually, I'm gonna go, since it's bias binding and it's stretchier, I'm actually gonna go to about 2.25 inches instead, because we wanna make sure that we are not going to have too much in there. All right, so now I know that I'm going to extend 2.25 beyond there. So I want to carefully lift this up, making sure I'm not cutting the one below. I'm going to cut across there. Now we're going to join this. So we were joining quilt binding, which we haven't had to do yet here. So I'll go over it real quick, just in case you're not a quilter watching this. What you're going to do is you're going to line them up right sides together, with the top one going off to the left and the bottom one just going straight down. Then what we're going to do is we are going to line up our top corners here. They should be going at a right angle to each other. And I'm going to just stretch that out so that it's going out across like that. And I'm going to pin that in place. Now I'm going to take, and still pinching those top 2 corners together, I'm going to work my way down to unfold to get my bottom 2 areas lined up as well. And this pin, I like to go across the diagonal here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from this corner here down to about where my pin is, so that I can join these strips. Then I'll have one continuous strip and you won't be able to tell where I stopped or started. You've kind of got to scrunch up this a little bit so that way you can get everything under the sewing machine. It's important to get these super flat so that you're not sewing in a fold or something. All right, now before we trim off those corners, we want to go ahead and lay this nice and flat. Make sure that we're not going to have any extra bulk there. I'm not. This is looking really good. So now I can go ahead and give this a trim. Just want to get these ends off here. And now I can go ahead and finish attaching the binding to the oven mat. All right, now this can go ahead and get flipped all the way around to the edge. And here's the great part of the bias binding, is it just wants to stay all around there. It is really pretty slick. It will just hold its shape and have a nice tight curve there, and so it's going to look really good. I'm going to go ahead and put binding clips on just to help hold everything where I want it to be while I stitch this down by hand, and then we're ready to use this. So this is why I really like doing this by hand, is everything is really thick right here where you've got the 2 layers for that pocket, and I can really make sure that I'm covering that stitching line and that I'm not going to be able to see any of that from the back. And so it just is a much neater appearance. I think it looks a lot more professional, actually even better than professional, because you know, one you buy at the store has not been hand stitched down like this. So, you know, it obviously is going to take a little bit more time, and if you're doing a bunch for gifts, maybe this isn't the best way to do it. But for me, for one that I'm going to have and use, I'm 100% taking this extra step. All right, so I gave everything a final press, and I love how this turned out. It's so cute. I can't wait to bake with it this holiday season. I love making cookies with my daughter, and it's just such a fun mother bonding moment. This is just going to be an adorable double oven mitt that can hang over our oven and be decorative as well as functional. And the biggest thing is just to make sure that you're using the proper materials. You don't want to just do quilt batting. You want to make sure you also have that Insul-Bright so that you're reflecting that heat back, and also double layer that with your batting so that way it's nice and safe for you and any kiddos that are working with you. But I think this is just so cute. I mean, the fabric combinations are great. That batting or that binding just rolled straight over the edge, and I'm really glad that I took the extra time to stitch that down by hand. Now you certainly can do a decorative stitch and just zigzag stitch over the top of that and have some fun. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, for something that I'm going to be using for years and years to come, I'm really glad I took that extra step. My OCD would kick in every single time I made cookies if I didn't do that, and I would have wished I had. So I know that that is the better choice for me. But it's super cute. You can slide your hand in to grab things out of the oven, and you are going to be good to go making cookies in style. All right, so just a reminder, we've got kits for this. You really just need a half yard of your main fabric, a half yard of your lining, and a fat quarter will get you enough of that bias binding that you need. And then you also need a half yard of the Insul-Bright and a batting. I just use batting scraps. Any quilter is gonna have a ton of that hanging around. But if you get a kit, you'll get everything you need to make this from us. Once again, you can get the pattern for free over on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Just search for Double Oven Mitt or click on the link in the video description down below. All right, make sure you like and subscribe for lots of other great tutorials and tips and tricks. And until next time, happy quilting.